Hello and welcome to this Mobalytics video. I'm your host Virakayu, and in this video we are going to talk about the champions most difficult to master. These champions tend to make very good one-tricks because you're constantly learning, improving, getting better at them, and there's a huge skill gap and win rate gap between good and bad players, as well as those who are just beginning to learn the champ versus those that have 1,000 games. So we're going to give a breakdown on each champion, why you might never actually truly master them, what's hard about them that requires a high barrier to entry, as well as giving you that room for expertise, that room to consistently learn something every game you play. And all edgelords can unite, those who like dashing around, raise your swords in the air, because this champion is very much my YASUO versus your YASUO. When he's on your team, he will go 0-8, and when he's on the enemy team, he's 15-0 and you lose the game in 8.5 minutes. Even with 200 games played, you know you're gonna miss a Q. You know you're gonna dash the wrong way, to the wrong person. You know you're gonna try and win wall a volley bear approach. Guys, you can't block him. And we even know some who have 5,000 games on him who can still miss tornadoes and ease. Obviously, not all of us are perfect. Everyone makes mechanical misplays. You just think one-trick ponies are a bit more exempt to those kind of things, but with these champions in this video, that's really not true. You have quite a few combos to learn. Flash Q, entering walls, E through waves, but also understanding how to move in and out of fights, trapping them, baiting abilities, blocking them with your win wall. That ability, oh man, it's worse than miasma sometimes. And in these team fights, they're not straightforward. You can't just dive in all the time. I mean, sure, if you have the Malphite, it's pretty easy, right? He R's, you are. But when you need to create your own opportunities, your own engage, it's ducking around and using everything smoothly and well together, or you're just going to end up dying. Even with hundreds of games, being good enough to make these sick plays you see in the montages, you can still have them where you are looking for that 8-0 power spike. At a basic level, you can say yes, he's right-clicking and pressing E, pressing R, win the game, but to play him to the full potential, there's probably only a handful of players who have ever mastered him to the level that when you watch it, you just sit with your mouth open and cannot believe what he's doing, and even then, they're still gonna end some games. To that end, if you like the dashy and being flashy, LeBlanc can be your original Akali, the AP YASUO, but despite having quite a very good laning phase, she can bully with all 3 spells Q, W, and E. In fact, junglers, those chains are very powerful. They can make for really nice ganks. I don't see enough junglers using her gank potential, but she can do poorly later in team fights even when fed. You need to have quick thinking under pressure in these fights, what combos to use, how do you want to use your ultimate. That comes down to your W. You're very squishy. If you get locked down with point and click CC, if you miss a timer to get out of a fight with your W, you're going to be one big dead hologram. You are an assassin. Your job is to shut down the enemy carry, bully your mid lane, and use that to roam. Now this roam potential pre-6 is very good, but you don't have that innate shove potential on the minions, so she has to bully the enemy out by abusing their resources in HP and mana, and then roam. You don't have the same kind of wave management. And we mentioned the E being really good for the setup and the CC, but if you miss it because it's a skill shot, you've got nothing else. Distortion can be used to juke a lot, dodge skill shots in every direction over walls, has huge outplay potential, and because of that does give you decent split push, you have that mobility as well. The R plus W gives you that AoE ability. Now while this damage is high, while you have good 2v2 bursts with your CC, mobility, disengage, decent scuttle presence on that note, there are just simply so many aspects to her kit. You have combos from level 1 poke, just using auto attacks in your W. You have level 2 poke combos, Q, W, auto attack, W, Q, auto attack. This for example is your main poke combo. The point is there's another one at level 3, at level 6. You need a very high level of lane matchup, and ultimately early CSing with your auto attacks is important because you have high mana costs. Everything I've just listed is a gargantuan amount of information, and a one-trick has to know this all basically in their subconscious. In a split second and at every phase of the game, you need to know her strength, weakness, what your goal is, and how to navigate surprise scenarios, or you're just not going to execute properly, and at the end of the day, that's what makes it difficult to master. Let's jump to the jungle now, and you know we're always going to talk about Lee Sin. A lot of people lately have been saying he's easy. I'm struggling to see how that's the case, but let's run with it for a second. I feel like the buffs before Worlds were slightly too much. I think when he's ahead, it can be very difficult to deal with this champion, and as such, when he gets a lead, either on purpose or by accident, it can make him very forgiving in that it's not very that impressive to insec anymore, and simply hitting your Q and your ultimate in a full combo can one-shot anyone, especially if you have 2-3 kills early. This inflates the suspicion that he's easy. He's not. Pathing, ganking lanes, understanding win conditions because you do not scale, knowing how to invade and abuse the enemy jungler while still ganking lanes, all of these have to go off at the same time, as well as having literally 6 abilities, obviously not to the same degree as a Jace or an Elise or a NIDALEE for that matter, but still enough that you have to understand every phase of those abilities and how to maximize them in 1v1 fights with enemy junglers, how to use them in ganks, And currently you will be seeing clips of high elo Lee Sin play. Compare that to your gold games, plat games, even silver games. You're not seeing that fluidity on the ability chains, on the quickness of the usage, on priming those abilities to maximize every phase of his kit. That's where Lee Sin becomes difficult. That's where he becomes hard to master. Using the ward hop and shielding your teammates, when to use one of those, when to Q, when not to, baiting out abilities with it. Flash kicking is easy, but the fluidity with which his entire kit flows is the definition of a good Lee Sin player. He can do everything he needs to in order to win in a split second. Someone who is not versed in the champion will not be able to do it that quickly, will miss those abilities often, and will just look clunky. Yes, LeBlanc, we went more with a data-driven discussion about her kit. With Lee Sin, we focused more on the poetry, but I think that in essence describes this champion. As much as I don't like phasing him, it's really about who the player is. If they are a good Lee Sin, I'll be scared. If not, I'm not really worried at all. Now on that note of having 6 abilities and yada yada, NIDALEE is one of those really weird junglers. She's actually in a very good spot, but only if you are 1 above Master Plus and 2 play in Korea. It's really the only server in elo range where she has that much success. The reason they're in is because once you get out of laning phase into mid and late game, she's so easily CC'd and bursted out. Like Lee Sin, she's less forgiving in this nature, but like Lee Sin, you need to be able to invade and use your ranged abilities as well as execute damage to shove enemy junglers out of the game. You need to know how to tower dive. You need to know how to contest objectives. Your snowball potential is very much on a clock, and it really goes nicely with high-level jungle pathing, high-level jungle knowledge, not to mention being very good at optimizing your first clears and moving very quickly out of human and cougar form, back and forth in fights, in and out, spear poke, heals, setting traps to bait execute in the cougar form. Like Lee Sin benefits from the hands that wield her, except to a much more extreme degree, and is less forgiving if you aren't actually very good with it. The fact that her win rate and efficacy dies out in so many regions and elos shows you that this really is a champion that is difficult to master. Now, if you want to have a champion that you can flex mid and top lane and also prefer to main, one trick, learn and understand, GANGPLANK can be one of them. He's hard scaling, he's good and at the same time bad against melees because he can get poked out of lane, but he can also, poke them out of lane. He's prone to all ins, but that orange is so good versus ganks and versus CCs, but he himself doesn't have any CC nor any inherent mobility. He scales with levels and items. We've talked about this in other videos. Level spiking and item spiking are 2 different things, but he has both. With a huge spike at level 13, since his EHP drop scales with the champion level directly. Q procs Grasp of the Undying and Sheen effects, so that gives you more utility with runes and itemization. And then you've got the Q that only procs Sheen effect but can crit, but it doesn't apply other unhit effects like Balk and Wit's End. So immediately understanding the Q and the E interaction with items is in itself sort of like a study. There's a lot of interactions with his abilities that you have to know, like Q giving extra gold. And here's something everyone likes, that E, 40% armor penetration and slows targets in AoE range. This means you can E-combo with several barrels. And what am I doing right now? I'm describing aspects of his kit, and the list is getting bigger, so you thought Aphelios was hard, but a GANGPLANK already existed. Just knowledge of these different interactions of his kit makes it so difficult for someone just to pick it up and learn. He's not a good combo champion, but he does have decent combos for you to know. He can impact the map without leaving lane, R is global, coordinate with the jungle for easy assists, and that therein is another skill that needs to be learned, the same for Shen players. Understanding macro, looking at the map, scouting for dives, and knowing when best to use it. You can also simply use it for wave clear when the enemy is split pushing. It requires a higher level macro sense in addition to the micro understanding of his core mechanics. For example, W is a cleanse, right? It gets you out of Malzahar, Maud, and Urgot ultimates. Can teamfight and split push. All of these things, put them together, think about it. How long is it realistically going to take you to master, and how long before you get it to a level that you're almost hitting it most of the time? Probably never, probably after 1,000 games. And that's where Azir is also a classic variant. Oftentimes the bane of pro play and as such changed the nerf to the point that he can never be good in solo queue because only pro players are going to end up abusing it. So he has to sit with a low win rate, low efficiency in solo queue just because the best players in the world can abuse his strengths when they are too suffocating. There are some very hard combo variations that are very easy to mess up. You've got the Shurima Shuffle, which is the absolute classic. Because he's required to be weaker in solo queue, the knowledge of these combos and how to use them properly, especially the Shurima Shuffle and the range, makes it so that watching a one-trick replay can be very pleasing to watch. And you just think, wow, can I do those combos myself? Can I look so fluid on this champion? The answer, that's probably no, but I'm not gonna stop you guys from trying, just saying that it's very difficult to master. Now we've got Kalista, who just got buffed, and you're seeing the Shy play this top lane. Now everyone thinks, hey, we can do that too. We can also play Kalista top lane. And then you see that, they really can't, and the win rate isn't that good. So tweets are going out kind of saying, play Kalista top if you're the shy, and if you're not, try not to, thank you. And ultimately, this is because she jumps while auto-attacking, and that jump range scales with her boots. And yes, she scales very well with items, but is very weak without them. Can get bullied ultra hard when you make those mistakes and jump in the wrong direction. She's one of the original tank shredders, you know, Bork and Hurricane, ultra kite because of that auto attack passive, and becomes a nice job replacing your jungler when they can never hit smite. But the downside is her ultimate utilization can be hard without tanks. In that sense, her support synergy is very important. While certain knowledge things can be quite easy, you know, like ears are slow and the damage stacks with the amount of spears, it's more that you're more dependent on your duo lane than other ADCs, and you do need to understand how to proc that W passive, which is 10% max health at level 1 by the way. So unlike the GPs and the LeBlancs and so on, where we can talk about their kit and the interactions with items and levels, you know, for about 3 hours, Kalista is more simplistic in that nature. However, if you don't get ahead and you do get bullied and you have bad support synergy and you don't know how to use the passive AA jump, you don't have someone to really use that ultimate to its full effect, it kind of looks like a really good uphill battle. That's why when you see someone just taking off with Kalista on a Smurf and you see they have 100% win rate in 30 games, you can say, okay, they've spent the time to try and master this champion, play around those weaknesses, they have someone to play with in the support position, and ultimately, they know how to get online very, very quickly. And as always with champions like this, knowledge of matchups is tantamount to your success, and that directly corresponds to games played. Now Thresh is an interesting one, because Thresh can go well with Kalista, but Thresh by himself is a difficult support. I mean, what do we suggest to people when they want to learn support? Blitzcrank, Nautilus, Leona, simple, tanky, engage, quick hooks, simple way to play. Thresh has his hook. However, the chain CC with the hook, then going in, then using Flay in the right direction, then knowing when to use ultimate, max range lanterns and knowing how to use it for a shield or to pull people in and out of situations. He's got such an overloaded kit, he's basically the quintessential support. If you said list a support that has everything necessary in order to excel at its job and help any ADC, it would be Thresh. A good Thresh, and you guys all know what I'm talking about, that hits these hooks, that chain CCs the jungle for 18 years in the Dragon Pit, that knows exactly when to lantern, that knows exactly when to roam and use that hook over walls to pull themselves in. What about the Thresh that hooks over a wall, starts traveling, throws out the lantern behind you while your jungler gets the crab, and then you follow them down for a tower dive on the bottom lane? We haven't even talked about the fact that he has a soul passive to pick up to give him added stats. But you're not as tanky as he looks and feels. That means the nuance and the finesse required to use this kit optimally isn't always done with newer players. It isn't always done until you have quite a lot of games played. But the one thing is, he's very enjoyable, and once you've spent hundreds and hundreds of games learning every matchup and learning how to become automatic on the hook and automatic with everything else, you have a champion that is unparalleled in your ability to dominate a game from this position. And that's why Thresh is on this list. And that's why we always have Zed and Katarina on this list. Melee assassins that require a lead in order to be effective. Melee assassins that need to know how to minion wave manage so that they can roam and impact side lanes. Melee assassins that need to know how to combo. Everyone hates Zed if you're an ADC. He's like the quintessential mid laner, and like Rengar's a quintessential jungler for forcing you to buy GA, and honestly ADCs hate having to buy utility. They just want to build Infinity Edge and crit all day. But to get ahead of Zed to the point that you can just one-shot so quickly even without your ultimate requires a certain ability and understanding of the map. The reason is because that W has a 22-second cooldown at the beginning, you can't afford to use that to farm. You need to know how to position in those pockets in the mid lane, manipulate your opponent with your Q harass, understand when to all engage and chunk, all while managing your energy appropriately. You also need to know the full damage of your death mark, hitting double Qs, triple Qs, using your ultimate to its full damage potential early to get yourself in the position that you can sort of just ult and someone dies by accident. You need to put in hard work early in order to get the benefits of having an easier game later. And now we often talk about Katarina in these types of videos because of the fact that there's almost no champion that spikes as hard as she does in the mid game, especially if you get a triple kill on a bottom lane dive. You can lose lane and still win the game with Katarina very easily. CS isn't as much of a friend as kills are. Also because of the fact that you can move around the fight very quickly with her mobility, but the slight RNG nature of her daggerfall means that once you do go in certain situations, you kind of have to commit. So both these champions have a sort of all in or nothing approach, and any champion that has that kind of requires good execution, because if you fail and you end up behind most of the time, you literally become nothing. We really couldn't have a list like this without Riven, right? You didn't think we were going to forget about Riven. Solo might have, but we have not, and the one-trick ponies have not either. Hypermobile champion with 4 dashes and insane amounts of combo potential. Scales very well into the late game with her AoE CC and a total 80 scaling shielding dash, which seems to rival that of Sets once you get full build. Can be played top and mid, but most bruiser top lane matchups are hard to pull off in the current meta. So again, champion matchups come into the equation, especially with skill expression. She has a very strong all-in at level 6 with the execute damage, and essentially, like a lot of the champions on this list, becomes oppressive when ahead. Strong dives since she can burst very fast with disengage, can get out of ganks very easily pre-6 with her dashes and stun, but a good Riven can always 2v1 the laner and jungler with a big damage. If you take anything away from this, big damage. Strong versus assassins and can roam very well because she has so much mobility she can move through even the 5th wall. And basically, if you're the kind of person that likes to stock 35-year-old whiskeys and wines and ports and brandies, and you have a special room dedicated just reading and thinking, then there is a novel on Riven combos that you can read and keep yourself interested for about 10,000 games. Despite all the pros and cons we've already talked about, your main weakness is that low sustain. Since you have no sustain in the kit except for the shield, you have to make sure you're timing that just right and not always just engage with it, because if you make a mistake, then you're gonna be kinda screwed. So use that passive and don't play Q spam. And honestly, I could talk about this for another 25 minutes because I spoke to a high elo Riven main of mine and the notes here are insane. And to close out here, we have Ezreal as well as a few other mentions. The fact that this champion always pops up no matter what shows you that skilled players always find a way to make him work. There's always something he can abuse or use to keep him somewhat relevant, to the end that he becomes OP and right nerfs him again and we repeat the cycle. The fact that he doesn't have the most oppressive laning phase, he's poke, he's mobility based. He needs to scale, he needs to stack tier, whatever it may be, you have to know how to navigate the landscape of the game as this champion before you're able to take it over. Understanding how to use a W together with the Q as well as the arcane shift in the right situation, it's all skill shot based and therefore makes life more difficult in laning phase. If you execute badly, you just won't have the same success as someone who does. And on that note to close, our honorable mentions have Aurelia, Sylas, and Draven. We'll start with Draven just to keep the ADC train going. Knowledge of picking up axes and doing that efficiently, using his passive well, being very safe while also being a lane bully to capitalize on his extra income. And because he is a lane bully that spikes really hard in the mid game, knowledge of how to abuse that to such a degree that the enemy hyperscaling ADC never even gets to buy 2 items. And again, that takes time and even the best Ravens can still mess up in certain metas. For Aurelia, she was very strong for a long time after the rework, right? Had to nerf her down, and now she's very much a good player can make her work, a bad player cannot make her work. Again, a trend on this list, but you need to know how to properly stack your Q, use your passives together, understand how to use that ultimate and the E, understanding your damage window and how much damage you can output, as well as using that Q like a YASUO E in terms of mobility, positioning, executing on the minions, and again, getting the resets for it such that your DPS is fully maximized. And finally, they may have nerfed the hell out of this guy and removed a ton of stuff from his kit. The fact of the matter is he does have wave clear and mana issues now that require more nuance in your laning phase. His turn potential and his ability to stick in fights like a Warwick, just with a lot more skill expression, centers on maxing that W and utilizing it to its fullest. If you're taking a mid and top, that's one thing. In the jungle, it's a different thing. You have to execute good pathing, understand level 2 ganks and invade pressure because your clears just aren't good. Similar lines there with the Q nerfs. And it is pretty obvious, I'm sure you know this, stealing an ultimate is great, it's not great if you don't know what the ultimate does, and that directly corresponds to your experience in game, your knowledge of matchups, and knowing when to use certain things with Sylas. And there you have it, a lot of different champions for different reasons, some more in depth than others of course, that explains why they're difficult to master, and also hopefully gives you a little bit of information that makes you want to main them and spend time learning them and becoming really good at it. Please do like, share, and comment if you enjoyed and learned something from this video. Do subscribe to Mobalytics for all the diverse content coming your way very soon. I have been your host Virakayu, and as always I will see you all in the next video.